Hello, everyone. Welcome back to I See What You're Saying, the Disciplined Listening Podcast. I'm Michael Reddington, and today it is my pleasure to welcome our next guest, Codey Gandy. Codey is a United States Marine Corps veteran, and he is also the Director of Experiential Training at Echelon Front, where he also serves as a leadership instructor, speaker, and strategic advisor. Codey dedicates himself to teaching every leader and every organization that he works with how to apply the principles of discipline, humility, and ownership, not just in our professional, but in our personal lives as well. And I'm glad you're here today because this is a great conversation where Codey packs all kinds of fantastic techniques and perspectives into the entire conversation for the whole 60 minutes. We're going to talk about many different topics: leadership, fatherhood, coaching, military, business, and beyond. But we're going to start the conversation with him outlining what leaders owe their teams versus what teams owe their leaders, and how we should all think about flipping the entitlement coin. He's also going to get into depth about the 4 core leadership skills we should all be developing. He's going to talk a lot about how we can all learn to communicate better under stress. He dives deep into why people make mistakes and what we can all learn from it, and so much more. This is an intelligence-filled, action-packed conversation. I'm really excited to share it with all of you today. Thank you for being here another week. While you're here, please just take a quick second, like the show, share the show with your network, leave us some feedback, subscribe to the show. We really would love to hear from you. We appreciate you being here. And of course, while you're online today, please take a quick moment just to check out our sponsors. You can go over to humantel.com and enter the code INQUASIVE25 for 25% off the best-in-class science-backed training to recognize when people's emotions are shifting by identifying changes in their facial expressions and nonverbal communication. Everything you need to know is right over there at humantel.com. For the professional interviewers in the room, please go check out certifiedinterviewer.com. That's where you can have all your questions answered and learn everything you need to know about both the Certified Forensic Interviewer designation and the International Association of Interviewers. It's all there at certifiedinterviewer.com. And while you're online today, we'd appreciate if you head over to inquasive.com. That's where you can learn more about the programs our clients ask us to custom facilitate for their senior leaders, sales teams, HR teams, and more, as we teach them how to implement the strategic observation and persuasive communication skills necessary to provoke the productive answers that help us solve problems and forge relationships faster. We appreciate you being here again. Without further ado, it is my pleasure to introduce to you Codey Gandy. Codey, it is a pleasure to meet you, sir. Thank you very much for taking the time to be here today. How are you?
Good, sir. Michael, appreciate the time and the opportunity. Looking forward to it.
Oh, the pleasure's all mine, man. Thank you very much. So as I was getting prepared for the conversation, doing some research to it, at least at the beginning, give our conversation a little bit of direction. We'll see where it goes. One of the things that really captivated my attention was, in broad strokes, your approach to leadership and really the responsibilities that leaders have towards their teams. So if I may, I'd love to open up the conversation by asking you, what do leaders owe their teams?
Yes, sir. I think that's a great place to start. And I think context-wise on my end, working for a company that teaches leadership, and I've been doing this for almost 10 years, and coming from the Marine Corps, I've been infatuated with leadership and what it looks like. One, because I had to learn how to do it in the moment. And then two, now I go around teaching it. But more than anything, I see a lot of tendencies that people naturally have when it comes to leadership. And so to your point, I think to answer it, I'll redirect it a little bit. I think oftentimes when we think about owing our team, or what does a leader owe their team, usually it's the inverse, right? It's, what is my team going to do for me? What can they provide? And I think a lot of people get lost in translation, what I call leadership entitlement. I know you and I were discussing this a second ago, but when you hear that word entitlement, a lot of times it's geared towards younger generations. And I'm younger. I'm not in my 20s, but I'm in my early 30s. But I get a ton of questions about entitlement in the younger generations. I really flip the script on entitlement. I talk about it from a leadership perspective. I think when people are leaders, and again, how we define leadership is simply your ability to influence. So that is how a CEO is leader, but also an intern is leader, because they have span of control, they have influence, to say the least. But leadership influence is you take your title, your position, your authority, and we think that entitles us to a bunch of things. And I was taught this very early and often in the Marine Corps as I picked up rank and picked up, true authority. I had a mentor sit me down and say, hey, promotions give you more pay, more rank, more authority, but it does not entitle you to anything. And I think a lot of times when you're in charge of people specifically, we think that that means something in the worst possible way. Hey, I'm in charge of you, Michael, so guess what? That means you automatically respect me. You automatically trust me. That's not how this works. You can think that all you want, but I think both of us could agree that we've definitely worked with or worked for people that were technically in charge of us, but we really didn't give a damn about what they said because of who they were. So if you think along that thread and what I think people owe their team, what I owe my team, whether that's my personal team at home with my wife and my 4 kids or the team I work at Echelon front, is I owe them everything. And I know that's not what people want to hear. I think nowadays, when you think of that entitlement again, it's always on the contrary. It's about that other person, the other people in itself. The reality is like I can't control them whatsoever. As much as whether I work on a team or even with my kids, which my kids are 7, 6, 5, and 3, like no matter what I do, I can't force them to do anything. Like right now, sure, I can muscle it if I want, but at the end of the day, they're going to make their own decisions in itself. So I think we as individuals, me as a leader, like I owe my team, my family, everybody else, I owe them everything. I owe them my best effort. I owe them my best attention. I owe authenticity to show them that I care. Like that is my obligation, not just an opportunity. It's my obligation to do that for the right reasons, for the right ways. And what is nice and a little bit of peace of mind is as you do that as a leader, what tends to happen is those things come back to you in spades. So that is, leadership. The reciprocal nature of leadership is as you do this the right way for the right reasons, it tends to come back full circle, which is what you want. Like I want to be able for you, Michael, my subordinate, my peer, my boss, to trust me just as much as I trust you. In order for there to be mutual, like something has to give. So it always starts with you as an individual, at Echelon front, that's where we come from. Like this is all about you. As an individual, what you do and what you say, those things matter in itself. So for me, simply put, what you owe your team, it's everything. Best effort, best attitude, best attention, all the above. And over time, what you tend to receive is those things, same things back.
I like that all of the above. That's a great illustration, and I'm sure we've both run into it. You talked about how much you're traveling before we went online, but as we work with organizations around the country, it's very easy for leaders to feel like I earned this spot, therefore everybody must obey, respect all the things that you say. And really, it is the opposite. And when we see people falling into that entitlement trap, the problems and the negative ripple effects that it has, I feel like there's another correlation between experience I've had and I've seen to something that you mentioned. Certainly I can't relate directly to the experience, but you talked about in the Marine Corps, having to learn within the moment, learning how to lead within the moment. I feel like a lot of times when we think about people in the private sector, they gain a certain level of technical expertise. And then somebody says, hey, you're good enough at your job, now manage other people. But they're never actually taught, I shouldn't say never, very often they're not actually taught what it takes to lead and manage other people. And then things tend to stumble and people need to learn in the moment. So when you think back to, in your own context, learning to lead in the moment, and I can imagine in the Marine Corps, that was a very unique environment to have to do that in. What were some of the key takeaways from that experience to you that we can pass on to other leaders that have to figure it out in the moment?
Yes, sir. So it's ironic that you brought this up. Usually when I start a conversation with a group of people, the first thing that I acknowledge is that proper leadership training is typically an afterthought. And to your point, natural progression is, hey, Codey's really good at his job, the X's and O's, so we think that's going to make him a great leader. But sometimes that works. Most times it doesn't, because those are two very different skill sets, technical and kind of the soft skill of leadership in itself. And so for me, it was no different in the Marine Corps. The Marine Corps being, kind of the smallest branch in itself, a lot of guys get a lot of opportunities very early and often. When I'm 18, when I'm 19, when I'm 20, when I'm 21, like I was always in charge of other people with no real formal kind of training in itself. So what I learned real quick was to be very observant of other people. And that's not anything for us to like really strive to do. We do that naturally. I think we as the human race are obsessed with what other people do. And from a leadership perspective, if Michael's my boss or you are my peer, like I should strongly think about observing you and how you do things. Because whether we like it or not, we like to take what people do and we kind of steal that to make it in our own. Because, we are not a byproduct of ourselves. We're a byproduct of other people. And whether that's your immediate boss or supervisor, or it's the other people around you, and you can learn a lot by simply observing and listening to what other people have going on. So that would be my first recommendation. That is something I strive to do really quickly. And what I found out is, I kind of started asking myself the question, like, what if you're only taught what not to do? Because look, sometimes you get a bad spell and you get one bad boss, you get two bad bosses, and 3 years later you wake up and you're like, is there ever any, greener pastures on the other side? And so the second part of my answer would be like, there's nothing wrong with you having the mindset to go look and achieve these things on your own. I think nowadays more than ever, there's so much curriculum, there's so many opportunities for you to grow as an individual. And I think a lot of times we as people think that that's just going to be dropped on our lap. Or if my company sees something in me, they're going to offer this opportunity. Like, sure, that may happen, but opportunities don't just come and sit on my desk and wait for me to take them. So for me, specifically now being 2026, like there's so much out there. There's books, there's podcasts, there's a lot of things that you can do. And so having a more aggressive mindset in terms of self-development, that can set you up for success. Because here's the thing, let's say you only have terrible leaders, but you have learned in yourself through other people. When you do get provided this opportunity, you may crush it, but you may be a little better off than you weren't before. So for me, it's kind of those two things in itself. That's what I strive to do. Is I was under the impression that no one was going to come help me. Not to say that wasn't going to happen, but sometimes that is the reality. And I think nowadays you go back to that entitlement. We think that everything's going to be spoon fed for us, not just kids, but adults in itself. And there's nothing wrong with being a little intentional, being a little aggressive to seek that out from yourself.
Again, all great points. And I am in no position to speak for what you guys do at Echelon Front, but that tag extreme ownership is thrown around quite frequently, specifically with the work that you and your team do. And I think it speaks to exactly what you're talking about is where do I create my own opportunities, how I take accountability for myself, where do I go make something happen that might not be on the table or handed to me. And I don't know. Sometimes I see guys at the gym or whatever wearing shirts that says like, no one's coming. And I'm like, you got a point, but can we put this in context? Is this really the way? But to have that kind of mentality of, I have to own this. And even if we go back to, I think some of the comments you made about being a father and being a leader and setting the example and bringing other people with you. So it's not that like we're islands, but if we don't sit back and assume that other people are going to come show us how to do it, then we can learn from the great examples and we can learn from the not great examples. And I guess worst case scenario, even if we feel like we only have the what not to do example, start with the opposite and go from there. Maybe it's still not the right thing, but at least it's the opposite of the wrong thing. And we're taking initiative for ourselves.
Yes, sir. And to your comment on the no one's coming to save us, obviously that's a huge military-esque comment in itself. And I sometimes thread that into my conversations. And if you take it from a military to a civilian application, it is simply being able to problem solve for oneself. That's really what it means. Now in the military, it's rather extreme. And when you work at, whatever organization, that may come off a little radical, but I don't think there's anything wrong whether you work at Echelon Front, you work at Starbucks or Staples or whatever, for you as an individual, regardless of where you're at in the organization, to be able to solve anything thrown your way. Like I think that would be the ultimate goal.
I love that thought process. And I think to now go off on a mini tangent, but even a lot of times when we're looking to promote people like we just mentioned or hire people, so often how they solve problems is not something that's explored in the interview process. How did you handle this situation? How do you think you would handle that situation? Can you do this? Can you do that? But if we can figure out if somebody has a real solid approach to problem solving, we can probably teach them the technical and unique cultural aspects of the job. They'll be able to adapt to that. So developing that problem solving mindset is likely crucial really for all of us, no matter what we do.
Yes, sir. Yeah. And to your point, we get the interview question a bunch on both sides, right? Hey, I'm interviewing for this new spot. What should I say? What should I do? Or vice versa. I have a new SVP position. Like, who should I look for? To your point, we always, like, my answer would be, I want somebody that's humble, coachable, and passionate. Like those three things. Passionate is kind of like they want to grow, they want to solve problems, like they're a go-getter. Coachable, that's somebody that I can teach in itself. And humble, we teach at Echelon Front that humility is the number one characteristic of a great leader. Why? Because if you can't be humble or your ego takes over, that's when a lot of bad things happen. But I really love that you said, and I would agree with you, for the most part, if you're a really good teacher, you can teach a lot of people to do a lot of things. Now, that's not an absolute, that's majority of the time. On the contrary, though, if I have somebody with a ton of experience, but they're egotistical or arrogance, teaching somebody humility, in my opinion, that's a hell of a lot harder than teaching a skill set in itself. So if I can find that out early and often, and so during interview questions, I always remind people, like, I would be prepared to say, like, I don't know. Or a lot of times panels nowadays, like they want to know, hey, Michael, at your last job, where's a moment where you failed? Like they want to see how you respond. Do you throw people under the bus? Do you take ownership? How's your accountability? So those things in itself. So that kind of, you mentioned the skill set thing. Like I would argue majority of the time, good teachers, which there's a bunch of those around the world, you can teach a lot of people to do a lot of things. So for me, I'm looking humble, coachable, passionate. And that really gets us to that proactive, humble person, which is what I think anybody wants.
Agreed, totally. My favorite answer to getting asked about like a failure, tell me about a time you failed or tell me about a time you struggled, made a mistake, whatever, is how many examples do you want? How much time do you have? And I got plenty. Where do you want to start? Got categories? Like we can talk about it. You mentioned something earlier when I brought up the guy in the t-shirt that said no one's coming to help. And don't get me wrong, like certainly I want to be careful with the military analogy. Sometimes you see a guy wearing a shirt like that and you're like, but I know why he's wearing that shirt. Sometimes you see a guy wearing that shirt and you're like, you probably would be better off if somebody was coming to help. But that's me being judgmental about people I don't know. But we talk about the transition, maybe is the right word to use, from military doctrine, language, habits, thought processes, problem-solving techniques into the civilian or the private sector world. And I would guess, I didn't serve in the military. People that have listened to me have heard me say that a bunch of times before. There are some that transition directly. There are some that transition with a little bit of adapting, and there are some that maybe don't transition so well because of the context that they were developed in. I would guess, and please, dude, correct me anywhere I need to be corrected, that with your team, especially at Echelon Front, you guys are working really hard to take a lot of those core philosophies, techniques, and thought processes from a very high-end military perspective and then adapting those for, not always, but often civilian and private sector life. How do you see regular people like me adapting these military-born and bred philosophies and techniques?
So I'll bring it back to when I first joined Echelon Front. So the first time I ever came check out Echelon Front, just a little context is needed. I got out of the Marine Corps in 2015. I was going into law enforcement. My dad's been a cop for over 30 years, so that was just seamless transition. A lot of vets go into law enforcement as it is. Was taking a little bit, was going through school, and then I got the opportunity to really come help out. And so there's a component of Echelon Front that I run now called our hands-on training. So instead of a PowerPoint, you just learn by doing. And I came out, and to your point, to be honest, I was extremely skeptical on what these guys were going to do. I'm out there watching Jocko, Leif, the rest of the crew. They're teaching, extreme ownership to this gas and electric company. And at face value, when I got there, like, I was right. Like, they wanted no part of this because at face value, it doesn't make sense. It's like, it's Navy SEALs, it's Marines. They teach the laws of combat. I'm gas and electric. Like, where's the connection points? But once I really started to understand, and now I understand it better than ever, like what we teach is simply like how you work on a team. Look, the variables of the military, of the Marine Corps, and what I do at Echelon Front, the variables are definitely different. The mission is different. But at the end of it, whatever organization you come from, whether it's the military or even at home now, all these pieces, they look the same in some way, shape, or form. The family that I have now, there's a lot of similarities to what I faced in the military. There's problems, there's challenges, there's people in charge, there's subordinates in kind of that capacity in itself. So there's a lot of being able to connect it as long as you can kind of remove that filter in it itself. So I'm always aware of the skepticism that we face, which I totally get. But once you really get into what we teach, like the four main components that we teach, the laws of combat, we teach how to work as a team. That's important for Navy SEALs. That's important for a family. That's important for Fortune 500 companies. We teach communication skills. Regardless of what you do, you have to be able to communicate. We teach how to properly make decisions. So decision making as we talk to. And the last one is, empowerment. How do we cultivate buy-in? I think all those are paramount regardless of what you do. So I think originally to the kind of common question, there are differences. And even as I go and speak, this month, and it's January 8th, like I've worked with a marketing company, I've worked with a general contractor, gas and electric. Those three are all wildly different at face value. They do different things. But inside those organizations, you have people and you have problems. And there's a lot of connections to that, to the military, to families, whatever, as long as you can get past that initial kind of skepticism that I think that we all face. At the end of the day, it's all relative.
I really appreciate you sharing that. And for the record, if I wasn't clear enough, I wasn't asking out of skepticism. I really just wanted to get it out there because I've seen firsthand how effective some of these things can be, even though I don't have that military experience. And the way that, and this might be a terrible analogy, I kind of think about it like hub and spoke. So the hub is some of these problems that you're talking about, problem solving, interpersonal dynamics, communications. There's a lot of spokes and a lot of different ways that those problems can manifest themselves. But if we stick to core concepts that we know work, we can then adapt those concepts to other environments. And selfishly for me, I'll get asked the question, well, what does interrogation techniques have to do with business communication? Well, you want to get someone to give you information they'd rather not give you? Well, let's sit down and talk about how to do that. So it's although very different, it at least has that thematic similarity. When you talk about communications, I'm going to make another assumption here. And again, dude, put me straight anytime I need to be put straight. I'm going to guess, well, I'm going to say it this way. One of the things that from the outside looking in fascinates or captivates me, if that's the right way to say it, is the way that people who work for the teams and units and military organizations that you just mentioned, especially yourself, learn to communicate in stressful or potentially stressful situations. Maybe it's not stressful for somebody like you that was in it enough times, but for those of us from the outside looking in, they're very stressful situations. And I'm sure you've seen working with companies in the private sector, as soon as conversations get stressful, shit just falls apart. People yelling, screaming, blaming, their message isn't coming out right, they're getting defensive, all of these other things. So in what might be the world's longest setup to a pretty direct question, how did you learn to communicate under stress, and how can we apply that in our lives?
That's a very good question. I think so to your point, as you look from an outside perspective into the military, what the military has that not really, that I can think of really any organization does have, is the amount of training that we are allowed to do before we actually get to do our jobs. From a typical Marine perspective, you're doing at least a year and some change, sometimes even 2 years of simply training every single day, 15 hours a day, just training to do your job. And involved in training, and what's nice is training is a controlled environment. You're able to add a lot of stress to that. It's a controlled environment. There's no risk. We can add that stress to teach people how to deal with it. And that way, 2 years later, you get into your real world mission, you kind of know what to do, and you can lean on those habits and tendencies that you've built. So that is the luxury that I think the military has that not a lot of organizations get to do. I think as I go around and I teach, is you have, a yearly, all hands meeting that people are a part of, or they have a virtual thing that they have to do, 3 times a year, and that's it. And then to your point, we just expect people to, hey, next time you face a critical thing, you have to do negotiation, or you have a client that's pissed off, like, don't worry, you got it. You're just relying on a hope and a prayer at that point, which is not what I want people to do. And so for me, and I'll go back to kind of the direct nature of the question. What I've learned now more than ever is I look back to the military, now the clients I work with, and I spend a lot of time talking about family as well, is stress is relative. The worst day of my life and the worst day of your life, like I'm not here to compare, but it's both a big deal for both of us. And so stress is a feeling that we get due to the variables that we face. And I'll tell you what, I've faced plenty of stress outside the military that was just as much or sometimes even worse than what I faced in real time. I got 4 young kids. There's a lot of stress involved in that. We've had some very scary things happen to our kids, and it's a lot to deal with. I've had negotiations or things like that at work where sometimes I don't really know what's going on. I make these assumptions, and there's a lot of stress, that pressure that builds up. So to your original point, I think stress is relative, which gets us to the bigger point, which is regardless of what you do, you better be able to figure out how to navigate it. Because I see a lot of people that don't know how to manage stress, and they get into something that's pretty mild and they flip out, they burn a bridge, they get cast off because of how they handle things in itself. So to me, this goes back to training. If you don't have the luxury to spend 2 years training for your job, which not a lot of people do, it's just the daily things that we can really pull apart and we can get better at. And I think a lot of people really underestimate and underutilize that. It's the whole, you talked about the gym guy, it's the going to the gym. If I practice working through stress today, I'm probably not going to see results. But if I spend the next month, the next 6 months, the next year, 10 minutes a day learning about myself or dissecting the stressful conversations that I have, I look up in a year, I'm way better off. But I don't think people have we're very nearsighted. We can't think big picture. So we give it 2 days and we're like, yeah, it's not worth it. And then we have to learn the hard way. So to me, that's really when we learn that we really need to fix things. We are stubborn creatures. And usually we have to learn the hard way on, man, I don't know how to handle stress, or I probably shouldn't have said that. And then that's really our awakening point to start to train a little bit more. So if you can take time every single day, learn more about yourself, you do that self debrief, which literally costs you a little bit of time, that can potentially save you down the road from doing or saying the wrong thing.
That's really important. And I mean, I'm not laughing at myself as you're talking about like the daily routine. I fell out of mine for like a month. We had some construction going on in the house. Then my kid got sick, some other things happened. And so now this week we traveled for the holidays. So now this week is literally my first week back in the routine. And every morning getting out of bed is like murder. Like just trying to get back into it. So, but you're right. It's easier to be short-sighted. It's much harder to stay with it. And even when you talk about that self accountability piece, you talked about having kids. My son is 8, so I'm kind of near the same area you are, at least with your oldest. And I've been very fortunate enough to have the opportunity to coach some of his sports. And there was a situation in one of his football games this year where the one time all season I got sucked into an argument. I was really good avoiding all of them, and then I got sucked into one at the very end. And literally the last game of the year. And then after it, my son is sticking up for his dad. He's like, "Well, Dad, that wasn't your fault." And I'm like, "Well, actually, dude, let's break this down." Like, there was a player for the other team hurt on the field right in front of me. I had several choices. I could have ignored it. I could have stayed with the player and helped him, or I could have gone onto the field, which I wasn't already on, in an attempt to get one of his coaches to come over and help him. I made the wrong decision. I went to get the other coach, and people ended up feeling like toes were stepped on, and we had to calm things down after that. So that whole like reflect on yourself can be difficult, but it's very, very important. I'd love to separate communications and staying calm just for a second, because I feel like I could spend hours just picking your brain on these two topics alone. When you teach communications, what are the main I'm not trying to ask you to teach all of your stuff here. So let me back up half a second before I ask the question. Give me your curriculum right now, please. But what would be if you were going to tell somebody when you're communicating with other people, these are the things you need to keep in mind, what would be the most important things you would want people to remember?
I think before we get to communicating, I mean, part of communication is the ability to listen. And I think nowadays more than ever, for lack of a better phrase, we suck at that. We're got short attention span. It's the hamster on the wheel. And I think all of us, we've been at a point in time where you're having a conversation and you already know what you're going to say before that other person finishes. And what I have found is I spend a lot of time listening now more than ever, whether it's at home, whether it's at work. I get to observe a lot of companies where I'll go watch their yearly sales meeting, their kind of plan for the year, and I just get to see what's going on. And when you listen inside a conversation, inside of a meeting, you just gain a lot of context. And I think a lot of times people miss out on the thing to actually say or the thing to actually do because they weren't paying attention in the conversation. So that's where I would start. But to your point, you can't just listen. Eventually, you have to talk. And so for me, if I'm going to work on communicating to somebody else, there's a couple of key things like I want to convey to somebody else. Typically, those are, what we're trying to do. So that's your mission or your commander's intent. That's why we're doing it. And we'll come back to the why. And the last one is expectations and parameters. So mission, why, expectations, and parameters. I think, and you've said it a bunch already. Oftentimes with those 4 things, we just make the assumption that the other person knows. And I think the huge problem we have with communication is we assume that it went well. We talk all the time. Just because you talk doesn't mean you're good at it. So I think we are terrible communicators. A lot of people are. And we learn after the fact, like, man, people didn't actually understand. But if you think on the why for a second, we talk a lot about the why, which is a 3-letter word. Like, how much could you spend on that? It's a big deal. And I think whatever excuse people want to make, like they don't need to know, they don't understand, or I don't have enough time. Here's the reality of the why. And I've learned this the hard way in life. We don't tell people why things are happening. They're going to come to that why on their own. And naturally, people are a little bit crazy and they're going to come to that worst case scenario, which is, actually, I'll give you a very good visual on this. I travel a bunch. I get delayed a bunch. It's just hard to write a book about just being delayed and canceled. When there's a delay, if anybody's flown before and there's a delay, people lose their freaking minds. And what I've watched, and I've done this a couple times when I've seen it just go like level 10, but I will watch the gate agent stand up there and they won't say a damn thing. And as time goes on, people start freaking out. And you'll start to hear why the flight is delayed from the peanut gallery. And stuff is crazy. They're like, there's a person on the wing. I'm seeing duct tape, like the pilot's drunk. And all these are just assumptions that people are making because that's what we come to because we don't know. And I've done this a couple times. I try not to do it because, I'm trying to just kind of stay back. But sometimes when it gets crazy, I'll just walk up to the gate and I was like, hey, if you could just give us a timeline or what's happening, and you'll just see the emotions really kind of dissipate in itself when people actually understand what's going on. So to me, The why is something that is often missed. And I think nowadays, if you speak to the older generations, that's not something they were brought up on. You didn't have to know why, you just did it. And now there's this habit that they have built because that's how they went through things. Now, the younger generations, they want to know why, what's going on, or why this is happening, and we get pissed off at them. The reality is, like, the why is a bridge for them to walk on as things shape and shift and change, because that's what's going to happen. And now they fundamentally have something to look towards because they have a little wherewithal on what actually is happening. So the why, I think, is pretty paramount. I'll pause real quick. I have one more thing on communication, but I don't know if you have any thoughts on that in itself.
I love everything that you just said. The airline example is perfect, and I try to enjoy those meltdowns myself, unless I'm running late somewhere too. Then I'm trying to stay calm and not get wrapped up into somebody else's meltdowns. That was a perfect example. I love how you said the why is a bridge to walk on. I think that is a fantastic statement. And so many times we've been operationally conditioned to tell somebody what to do, wait for them to say no, and then tell them why. But after they say no, they're no longer listening for a reason to do it. They're listening for anything we say to defend their reason for why they don't want to do it. So we've like built more resistance to why it's not going to work anymore. So flip the script, give the why first. I absolutely love what you said. I'd love to hear the last thing you were holding on to.
Yeah, and the last one, so oftentimes in organizations or really in any environment, there's something that naturally happens is you'll have the boss up front, you'll have the speaker up front, they'll give this huge long dialogue about what's happening, mission of the company, next steps, whatever it is. And at the very end, every leader or speaker will do the same exact thing. All right, team, we got 10 minutes here. Who has questions? And in that moment, I think everybody knows where I'm going. Like, you just hear crickets. And that tells us a lot about the conversation. It tells us a lot about human nature. A lot of what we teach at Echelon Front is all about human nature. And ironically, what we tend to do is opposite of what we should do. Inside that moment, when you hear crickets, when you ask questions, two things happen. One, as a speaker, it reinforces that everybody understood. I make that assumption. If I get no questions, we're all on the same page. But the bigger the group, the less likely that is going to happen. I may catch 2, 3, 5, 50%, but some people are not going to know what's going on due to whatever. The other side to this is when people are confused, I think all of us, we have this inherent fear of looking stupid in front of other people. So it's very hard for us in a moment when you, Michael, the speaker, says who has questions, and I don't know what's going on, to be like, hey, boss, I really wasn't paying attention. Could you go over that? We don't do that. I've seen this play out 1,000 times. People don't do that. Well, what we tend to do is you, the boss, leaves the room. I go to my counterpart and I'm like, hey, what the hell did Michael just say? And now we're playing this game of telephone, which you have a kid, like, it's never going to work out. At the end of this, I think we're going right. We're supposed to go left, and we're kind of lost in translation there. So in order to mitigate assumptions and to navigate this healthy fear that we all have of looking stupid in front of other people, there's this component we teach, which we've all seen this, so this isn't really that curriculum based, but it's something very simple but very overlooked. It's called the readback. It's called three-way communication. If you've ever been to a restaurant before, you've been a part of it, where you order something and the server will say, hey, just to make sure, you want the steak medium with mashed potatoes and green beans. You're just reinforcing what the other person said. I think a lot of time, effort, resources, money, frustration, all those things can be saved or mitigated by doing this readback up front. Now, the irony of this readback, this conversation, which is simply just a checkpoint at the very end of a conversation. Hey, Michael, real quick, I want to make sure we're aligned. Hey, what's the 3 things we're going to do before next week? I just want to check in at the very end. The reason I do this now in this controlled environment is there's a lot of things that I can control. We're in the planning phase. This is upfront. There's not a lot of stress, to your point. But the funny thing is what I like to tell people about the readback is you're going to get a readback whether you do it or not. Here's what I mean by that, and I'll use a very simple example. If I tell you, Michael, and we go back to the Marine Corps, to go to building Alpha 1 at 5 p.m., I can stop right now and make sure that we're on the same page. Or I'm going to get a real-time readback at 5 p.m. if you're at the right building. And I think a lot of times we learn that we've communicated ineffectively a little too late. It's when the project needed to be completed. It's when the deadline has already passed. It's when the client already wanted, A, B, or C. That's when we learn, like, oh, we weren't on the same page. Oh, people had no idea what to do. Why didn't they ask questions? And then we kind of go through that in itself. So this readback, I would argue, from a time perspective, is probably your greatest ROI from a leadership perspective. I could give you way too many examples to count for. Whether it's at home, whether it's at work, I do this with everybody. I do this up the chain, down the chain, to the side, with my spouse, with my kids. Like, think of it from a parenting perspective. How often do your kids go and do the wrong thing? I mean, they're kids. It's the hamster wheel. Like, stop, make sure, communicate effectively. That way you don't get pissed off. You react emotionally to your point. Then you have to deal with that after the fact. So to me, I could spend a bunch of time talking about communication. I think majority of our problems, I would say, not to quantify it, but 75% of the time it's because we communicate ineffectively. Because poor communication leads to two things. It leads to confusion and frustration. And when I look at problems inside any thing out there, family dynamic or work in itself, when people are confused or frustrated, that just means more problems that we have to deal with. So to me, communication is a huge part of it. Something we spend a lot of time talking about. I spend a lot of time talking about and observing. And I think the thing that we tend to miss on is we're not as good as we think we are.
Myself included, for friggin' sure. All tremendous points. And even to take just a couple of steps back, that, you know, the clarity of expectations and parameters are so important. You touched on that earlier. It's a lot of times that creates confusion or misaligned expectations, and then people they get frustrated after that. I love that readback technique. And I had to chuckle a little bit when you said real-time readback, because how many times have I thought somebody understood, then they do something different. The funniest is with my son, because of course at 8, he has no filter. I'll ask him to do something. He'll go do something different. And I'll be like, dude, Gabe, and he will turn around and yell at me why he thinks he's doing what I told him to do. And easy 90% of the time I have to stand there and go, yeah, you're right. Like, that one's on me. So all super important points. I sort of diverged because you were, the way that I asked the initial question, you were kind of talking about staying calm and communicating at the same time. And so we kind of switched to communication. If we can, I'd like to go back to staying calm for a moment as well. Anytime I can ask somebody this question, I want to make sure that I do. Given your unique experience, how have you learned to stay calm in stressful situations?
I mean, simple answer would be training. It's iteration after iteration. But there's a tool that I teach in terms of, hey, when dealing with stress, what are tangible things that we can do to mitigate that so we can make the right decision? I'll kind of give you my elevator pitch on this. So I think all of us, you know, as individuals, like, not all of us, absolutes are very hard to get behind. Most people want to do the right thing. I rarely, if ever, see somebody that wakes up and they're like, you know what, I can't wait to be fired today. Like, I hate this job. I hope the company loses money. I hope everybody gets hurt. Sometimes that happens, which we can talk about later. But majority of the time, like you, me, like we want to do the right thing. I want to raise my kids right. I want to treat my spouse right. I want to help the company. I want to do all those things. But sometimes I make the wrong decision. That goes for me and that goes for you. So when I look at decision making in itself, and you can thread in kind of the stress or how to deal with that, it's all relative. To me, there's really three things that play a role or play a bigger role in making decisions that push us in the wrong direction to say or do the wrong thing. So we've talked about a couple of them already. The first one is, you know, your ego, right? And I think if we're aligned on what an ego is, that's our shadow. It's the thing that cares about us more than anybody else. And I think we really missed that last point on, look, my ego, just to be honest, doesn't really care about anybody else. Like, it cares about me more than anybody. And that is how, when you say egotistical things or you act arrogant, you tend to find yourself in hot water, because it's not out to please anybody else except for yourself. So we're trying to mitigate, not remove, ego-based decisions. The second one is emotional. So you talk about that with your son's football game, which I coach my kids as well. And I could give you a bunch of coaching stories of watching parents flip out. The thing about emotions is, I think a lot of times people misinterpret how we teach emotional intelligence. Oftentimes you see military people and you think like they're very stoic, they just turn them off. I never recommend that. A huge thing that we teach at Echelon Front is about, you know, relationships, getting along with people, that whole piece in itself. And somebody that's cold and standoffish won't cultivate that buy-in or that relationship because they're that a-hole or that person in itself. So being able to turn down your emotions versus turn off are two very different things. To your point, I love that you said this. The thing about emotions is we tend to not be able to control like how we feel about things, but how you respond, like that is completely within your wheelhouse. Becoming upset or becoming pissed off or even being like happy with joy, like those things naturally are going to happen. Acting on those things are two very different things. Oftentimes it can be knee-jerk reactions, which those are hard to navigate. That's why training is so important. But most of the time, when my oldest son, whose name's Bear, when he pisses me off or does something stupid or irrational, there's a moment in time where I choose to make the right or wrong decision. I can choose that silly thing that he did to be the worst thing in the world. Or what I see a lot of parents struggle with, and me included, is bedtime with kids. It's 7:30, it's 8 o'clock, whatever your bedtime is, and all you want your kids to do is go to sleep. And as a parent, sometimes kids get so tired that they're not tired anymore. And the only thing they need is sleep, but they refuse it. That was us last night. And I talk about this a lot. Like there's this moment in time where you get so pissed off, so frustrated that you lash out and you do something that you end up regretting. You have to live with that after the fact. Like I don't think anybody wants to treat their kids or spouse like crap, but we do. Why? Because you're acting on emotions. So being able to turn those down are important. So ego, emotions, and the last one is perspective. You can look at this from two different angles. Perspective is, the platform that I stand on, what I actually see. And sometimes the answer you need is not from your lens, it's from a different side of it. The other piece to this is experience. So look, experience is important. I'm not here to take away anybody's experience. How you utilize experience can be right or wrong. And so I'll go back to coaching. My older sons play football. I definitely force that concept. I played football as a kid, played high school, played college. I've coached high school, coached little kids. I have a ton of experience from a football lens. And when I coached last year, my 7 and my 6-year-old, I know what is right. Like there's no 80%, like 100%. They're running man zero. They're blitzing everybody. You're supposed to pass into the blitz. Like I know without a doubt what to do. With experience, there's a choice you get to make. You can leverage your experience, or you can, it's not abuse. Leverage or basically push experience. I can't figure out the word off the top of my mind. Wielding experience is, hey, you're going to do it because I said so. And I don't care if you're 8, if you're 30, if you're 50, nobody likes being dictated and told what to do, even if you're right. And that's the hard thing is I can go to my son and be like, hey, you're going to do this because I know it's right. And as as a father, they're going to go, why? Or they're like, I had a better idea. And now we're fighting over something stupid that doesn't even make sense. Leveraging experiences, hey, you have an understanding, you have lessons learned, you're coaching and teaching and mentoring, which are two very different pathways in itself. So when I think of managing stress in itself, part of it is understanding those three things play a role whether you like it or not. When stress comes at home, at work, your ego is going to be there. Your emotions are going to rise up and you will have a perspective, whether it's physically or from an experience standpoint, like they play a role whether you like it or not. So the tool that we teach is called detachment, which you look at it from a bunch of different lenses. To me, it's all about creating time and space before you make that decision. We want to mitigate knee-jerk reactions because those tend to bite us in the ass more than anything. Sometimes we have the flexibility to let stuff go where, Michael, you're my boss. I'm like, hey, you know what, man? I'm going to get back to you tomorrow. Sometimes you have that luxury. I think we have a fear of doing that because we look weak, like I should be able to handle in the moment. But here we are dealing with people. Sometimes you don't have the luxury of doing it overnight. Sometimes you have a couple minutes. Sometimes you have a couple seconds. And so to our point earlier, through training over time, and I think, life gives us opportunity to train as long as you're looking for it. How many times a day do you get pissed off or frustrated with just dealing with people? It's in traffic, it's at airports, it's at the supermarket, it's when you call customer service and you talk to the automation instead of a person. Like every day, there's countless opportunities for all of us to train. It's just we don't take it for granted. We do take it for granted. We don't take those opportunities in itself. And that is how you can look up in a year and it really doesn't matter what's thrown your way. You have a worst case scenario, you got to let somebody go, you have a sick kid, whatever, and that stress is manageable because you're able to take those things aside and make the right decision in the right moment.
So many great things to try to circle back to. That line, life gives you plenty of opportunities to train as long as you're looking for them, is gold. Is gold. Every day, all day long, we have the opportunity to choose how are we going to handle, how are we going to respond, how are we going to prepare. It's gold. If people can just take that, we have opportunities all day long to make ourselves better in practice. And the more reps you have, the less stressful it is, as you've mentioned so many times. I'm tempted to just pivot and now start coaching about youth football because I'm sure I'm going to end up having to assistant coach again next year. And I do not play college football, so I need as much advice as I can get from you as possible. But that'll be for another time, another day. You did on that thread talk about, I think I heard you say that coaching versus teaching and mentoring can be two different paths. If I heard that correctly, I would love to ask you to explain what you mean by that.
I think there's a lot of similarities. Like we are transitioning into basketball right now, which I don't have basketball experience whatsoever, but here we are. It's 7 and 6. It can't be that hard. Yeah. Anyways, when I look in whether it's a physical sport or at work, I think your approach tends to be different. Coaching is a little more brash, a little more blunt, a little more harsh, and I think that should be reserved for kind of when people get exponentially older, you look to the college ranks from a sport perspective, or your more senior employees, when you do have that relationship, which is founded on trust and respect, you can be a little more upfront, a little more direct. I think everything else, like the approach, and I would argue it's majority of the time, 90% of the time, like we want to mentor and we want to teach. So we're taking relatively a back seat. We're trying to get them to get to that conclusion on their own. Is there a time and place to step in? Absolutely. But I want people to figure things out for themselves. Like that is the end result. And so that's how I would separate the two. And I'm not here to tell people like, hey, never step in, never say anything, never give direct feedback. Like there's a time and place. But I think it's few and far between. I think the indirect approach, which is you're coming from a place of compassion, you're giving people time and flexibility to actually make the right decision in the right moment. Will they make mistakes? Sure, 100%. And I think a really good example, since we keep talking about it, is parenting in itself. Look, there's a time and place for me, absolutely, without a doubt, to step in and correct my kids' actions. There is. My kids right now have this fascination of jumping off our gazebo onto a trampoline. It is what it is. I don't have a problem with my older kids doing it. I don't. They're gonna learn. What's the worst case that happened? They break a bone, whatever the case may be. They're kids. I want to let them go. But when I watch my 3-year-old try to climb this sketchy gazebo and jump off, like that's full stop. Like you're not gonna do these things. So to me, when I look at parenting in itself, the whole goal as a parent is for your kids to be able to make their own decisions by themselves. Essentially, and you can tie this back to leadership, like as a parent, you want to become obsolete. And that scares a lot of people. And that is, for me, I know this now more than ever, and it's going to happen sooner than I realize, is my kids will be put in a position with outside influences, with peer pressure, with a bunch of stress, and they're going to be forced to make a decision between right and wrong. It doesn't even matter the context of it. And there's going to be a choice that has to be made. And I want them to make the right decision for the right moment because they believe it's the right thing to do. Not because they're afraid of what I'm going to say or what I'm going to do or the punishment that's going to happen or this is what dad would say. Like I want them to figure it out for themselves. I want them to be kind of that problem solver that we talked about. And so this isn't to say that, you're not there to support or you're not there to help. Like, no, I will always be there. And parenting is this, you're never off the hook essentially. But again, it's going to happen when they're 10, when they're 13, when they're 18, in their 20s. Like I want them to be able to solve anything thrown their direction. And that is really a reflection of you as a parent and as a leader. And I think I heard you talking about this with somebody else, and we might have talked about this at the very beginning, but this is an unpopular opinion. And I'll talk about it from a leadership perspective first and spin it to parenting. A team is a reflection of their leader. You talk about what do you owe your team? I think if I'm in charge of a team and my team is not very good, that's a reflection of me, not them. I have not mentored, coach, teach. I have not set them up for success. I have not communicated effectively. And I think a lot of times people can get behind that. But when I spin that narrative to parenting and I'm like, hey, your kid's a reflection of your parenting, a lot of people have a really hard time with that. Like, you don't understand my kids. You don't know what's going on. And you're right. I don't. But sure, you may be given a bad apple or maybe a little challenging, but there's definitely a way out of it. And so I think it's easier to pass the buck and blame the kids or blame the team on they're not getting behind it. But at the end of the day, like the responsibility is on your shoulders. So I do have another thought on that, but I know I'm rambling this for a minute. I'll pause real quick because I do have a point of talking about like why people make mistakes. And I think that's paramount for us to understand. So it's easier for us to reflect on, hey, this is on me. Like I need to fix this, not them.
Just go there.
Okay. So when I look at, we talked about making the wrong decisions from a personal perspective. When I look at other people, it's a bit different, but there's a lot of underlying themes. When I find that people make the wrong decision, whether it's my kids, whether it's my teammates, whether it's my clients, or whether it's their employees, people tend to make mistakes based on 3 things. They don't understand, they don't know how, or they don't care. Okay, so I can look at that from a Marine Corps lens, parenting lens, whatever you want. If I understand that's why people are making decisions, and again, people aren't waking up choosing to make the wrong decision. If I understand and I can pull a thread on why these things are happening, it gives me a path to overcome and fix these things. So if I have, and I'll go to the parenting because that's the more challenging one. My son's making the wrong decision because he doesn't understand. That happens all the time. I think parents, we struggle because you talk as an adult to a kid that understands. They're a child. He's 7. He doesn't understand my background, my experience, everything that's going on. And so I get frustrated when he doesn't understand what I know. And when people don't understand, they get confused, they get frustrated, they get pissed off, and things happen. So if I understand my son doesn't understand, that's a communication problem. I can fix it. That is up to me. That is my responsibility. If they don't know how, along the same thread that we just talked about, that's coaching, teaching, or mentorship. That's one of the things that I can do. Look, sometimes that's just part of it. My son right now doesn't know how to like fully read. That's not his fault. Like, and I homeschool, so it's actually my responsibility better than anything else. And so whether it's him or somebody else, like if somebody doesn't know how to do what you're asking them to do, like that's on me. And the last one is they don't care. And this is the one that I get a ton of remarks about, because everybody feels like people on their team, they don't care. I'm like, okay, I get it. And the first thing that people come to mind is like, okay, if they don't care, just let them go. Now, if my son doesn't care, I can't get rid of him. Like, that's not how it works. But if you have somebody on your team that doesn't care, you got to ask yourself why. We come to conclusions on why people don't care. To me, it's for a variety of reasons. Number one, unique correlation to they don't understand, therefore they don't care. If I don't fully comprehend what the hell we're doing, then I'm not going to care about like me actually putting in the effort. So there's a correlation between communication and kind of this buy-in. On the other side, sometimes we actually walk into scenarios where somebody else has played a role into them not caring anymore. And that's the unfortunate reality of dealing with people. Is people come with leadership baggage. They were treated like crap. They were let go. They were laid off, whatever the case may be. And now they're on your team. And you didn't play a role in what happened, but you play a role in what you do next. And so when people don't care, there's got to be a reason why. I feel like most of the time people are waking up and they're like, yep, this is the day. I hate it. I'm choosing not to care. Like something has happened, whether it was somebody else or sometimes it is us. We tend to miss the mark because we don't see ourselves in how we interact. We may be the culprit of putting someone in a position. And so how do we overcome somebody that doesn't care? Little sidebar on this. I was with a client, and be careful with how I say these things. They had like a company stance, and it was plastered on the walls. And basically the motto was, you can't teach, give a SHIT. Mm-hmm. Right. And that was like the company motto written by the CEO. And as I walked in, I'm trying to like really think about it, ask a couple questions. And like, to me, I fundamentally don't I'm against that. All right. Because I talk about this, I don't care. So if you have somebody that doesn't give a crap about what's going on, I think all of us, and how you fix this is you as an individual, you try to cultivate buy-in. I think all of us, regardless of who you are or what you do, there's been a point in time where you stopped believing in yourself. You were overwhelmed, you were stressed out, whatever it was, something has happened to you and you didn't know what to do, and you were lost and the world was out to get you. You were a victim to whatever was going on. And then somebody came and helped you out, a mentor, a coach, a parent, an aunt, uncle, whatever. They took a liking to you. They cultivate this buy-in by building trust, having a relationship, and that pulled you out of what's going on. And so if I have somebody that doesn't give a crap or they don't care, like the onus is still going to be on me. That is a decision that they're making, but I am going to exhaust all options to get them back on track. Sometimes it doesn't work out, which that's part of it, but it makes things a little bit easier when you have exhausted all options of getting them up to speed. So whether it's a kid, whether it's an employee, when I look at people making the wrong decision, like traditionally there's a reason why. They don't understand, they don't know how to do what you're asking them to do, or they don't care. There's a solution to all three. It's not an absolute, it's not a fix-all, but there's a way to overcome those things. And that's how you're not waiting for them to fix this problem, because now you're relying on somebody else. The extreme ownership philosophy is, what can I do? Either I did something or I'm going to do something. That's the onus that I have as a leader in itself.
Thank you. I'm glad that we just skipped straight to that. I have 5 different ways I want it to go. So I'm going to try to talk English and wrap this up real quick. I was facilitating a program a couple of years ago now, and it's one of these like CEO groups. And the guy, one of the people asked a question kind of similar to what you just meant. I have a leader on my team and he acted in a way that's outside of our values, blah, blah, blah. And the guy who runs this group stands up, walks in front of me and says, well, if we have people who, how did he say this phrase just drove me up a wall sideways, which could be a me problem for the record. When they're acting outside of our integrity, they need to leave the organization. And to your point, I'm like, yo, hang on. You could be right, But before we just jump to acting without integrity, can we stop? And you said this earlier, and I love it, and build some contextual awareness. What is really going on? Like, is there something outside in his life? Is it a misunderstanding? Do they don't have the expectations? Da, 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 da. If we work backwards from there and find out that he's acting outside of integrity and you want to get rid of him, fine. But if you're going to start there, we have a much bigger problem. So one of the phrases I keep thinking of as I listen to you give these great examples is like the lowest common denominator. If I'm the leader, I'm the lowest common denominator. If I'm the father, the parent, I'm the lowest common denominator. It all comes back to me eventually. So if I I'll do one last coaching example, but when I was coaching a little league baseball team, oftentimes I would say bring it in, and that meant come to the dugout, because that's where I would be sitting. Well, they had a tough inning. We're talking 5 and 6 year olds. So I walk out to the first baseline because I'm just going to try to make these kids happy before they have to hit. I'm like, all right, guys, bring it in. And all 10 kids on the baseball field ran past me and went into the dugout. And my buddy that I'm coaching with looked at me, he's like, I guess they're not listening today. And I turn around, I'm like, dude, anytime you ask 10 people to do something, they all do the same thing, but it wasn't what you asked them to do, it's probably because you didn't ask it the right way. I'll go talk to them in the dugout. Like that one's on me. So no, I love everything that you said. I'm keeping an eye on the clock, and I want to be very respectful of your schedule. So I'm going to take a hard left turn because there was, or maybe a right turn, I don't know, but there was one question that I wanted to ask you based on your experience that I think can relate to people that doesn't really relate at all to some of the last couple of things we talked about. I'm guessing in your career in the Marine Corps, as you got promoted, you were getting promoted above your peers and potentially having to lead peers of yours. So there might have been times where you were with a group of guys, somebody gets promoted, in this case yourself, and now you've got to turn around and lead them and or lead people who were in the Marines longer than you or were older than you or these kinds of things. And that happens all the time in the private sector, and people struggle with it. So again, being respectful of your schedule, if I could just ask you one more question. From that experience, what did you learn about getting promoted above your peers and having to lead your peers or people who see themselves as being more experienced than you?
Yes, sir. Very common question when we get a ton of, and it's a hard transition. And if you add the dynamic of, you and Michael, or sorry, me and you were friends because we were peers, and now I get promoted, that's another dynamic going from, that buddy to boss scenario in itself. So to me, it's a couple of things. You could talk about this for a while, but to me, it's a couple of things. First is, the single best way if you're getting in a new position is to become an advocate for the team or become an asset for the individuals around you. That is how you can mitigate the kind of healthy fear that we have on, man, I just went from friend to boss. Or I'm an outsider walking into this organization and nobody really knows me or what I'm doing, and they have more experience. Like, what's the best thing to do? There's a common phrase like new sheriff in town. That's what a lot of people do is, hey, I'm now in charge. You're going to listen to me. And whether you come from buddy to boss or you're outside now internal, you're definitely going to rub people the wrong way. I think the single best way, regardless of how the transition happens, is for you to become a support system for the team, because that's what leadership is. You're there to communicate effectively. You're there to paint the why. You're there to provide resources. You're there to ask them for their ideas. When you do it the right way, it doesn't matter how the transition happened, you're naturally going to fit in. So that's kind of step one. The other part is, if you are fearful of that transition, is that expectation piece. I think oftentimes we just assume that, hey, Michael, you and I were friends and now I'm your boss, that it looks different. And you should know that. There's some truth to that, but I'm not going to leave it up for interpretation. I want to make sure that I address it in terms of addressing expectations. The last one, and this is just personal opinion more than anything, to your point, in the Marine Corps, that was every progression that I went through. It was always, we were friends, we were peers, and now I'm in charge, and it was hard for me. And I struggled with this initially because to my own point, I didn't set expectations, and I found out real quick that people didn't know where the line was drawn, and so they would take advantage of it. And then instead of having, a mildly hard conversation up front, I had to have a really hard conversation down the road and like, hey, Michael, we can't do that. And then it was really hard to recover from. And most of the time when people get to this uncomfortable truth, they'll avoid it like the plague. Like, it's Michael will figure it out or someone else will fix my problem for me, but that's not really how this works. So anytime I had buddies specifically, in personal opinion, I would actually hold my buddies to a higher standard than the standard that we actually had set. Because I knew, and I know, people are watching how I treat my friends. And if I let things go or I let you show up late, I'm going to have a bigger problem on hand. And to me, to really kind of close out this thought, I spend a lot of time talking about culture nowadays in the Marine Corps. We're heavily, culture is our thing. Like, it's what we talk about. And I get a lot of questions now about cultural problem. So again, cultural problem is the masses are doing the same thing, kind of to your 10 kids going to the dugout. That's it. That was a cultural decision. When I look at cultural problems, I don't think the masses wake up and meet offline and everybody just decides to do the wrong thing. Like, something happens and over time we get to this big approach. And so when I look at this expectation or holding people accountable or having these conversations, I can always trace back cultural problems to individual problems that weren't solved. So if I'm your boss and I let you show up late and I let that go because we were friends and I think it's the right thing to do, as I let you show up late, naturally everybody else is going to think they can do the same exact thing. And that is how you wake up 6 months later. And now the culture of the organization is we get to show up late. And so to me, if you ever find yourself having kind of that, I don't know the proper phrase, but it's kind of that, you just get a warning sign, you get a feeling that like, hey, we're not tracking, we're not on the same page. You got to have these conversations early and often. Because when it gets to a little too late, what we tend to do is we tend to avoid it, or we tend to think that they're going to figure it out for themselves. And that is how you get to, hey, now I'm in charge of 10 of my peers, and nobody will listen to anything that I say. That doesn't happen overnight. That happens over time. So to me, it's expectations. It's being an advocate for your team. And then that standard piece. If you have people that are close to you, I would have conversations that hold them to a higher standard, because people are waiting to seek out a shortcut if they can by you simply allowing your friends to do the wrong thing.
And by having the conversation with them up front, everybody knows they're on the same page and they don't feel like you're messing with them for any other reasons. That was a fantastic answer. I really appreciate it. I could keep you captive all afternoon long and keep asking you questions, but I'm sure you got other things to do. So I can't thank you enough for everything that you shared today. Thank you so much. For the people that are listening and they want to stay connected, they want to continue to follow you, they want to continue to learn from you, where should they go and how do they stay connected with you?
Yes, sir. So as a traveling father, I'm not too much on social media. I only have the one Instagram, which is just Codey, Codey.Gandy. That's my last name. Otherwise, everything I've talked about is coming from the company I work for called Echelon Front, and that's just echelonfront.com. And if anybody has any questions, comments, concerns, or wants to chat, you can find me on either of those platforms.
Fantastic. And I'll make sure I find that Instagram link and I'll put it in there, and I'll have the Echelon Front link in there as well for everybody. It was great to meet you. I really appreciate taking the time. Thank you for everything that you shared with us today. I appreciate it.
Awesome. Thank you, Michael. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Take care. Codey, thank you for a fantastic conversation. I really appreciate you sharing all of your time, expertise, and insight. I took a ton of notes listening to you, and I hope everybody else did as well. So many great points and topics we could go back and highlight. A few that jumped to mind are how you talked about stress being relative to all of us and the power of training to prepare us and make the situations we encounter less stressful. You said it. There's opportunities we run into every day that we can help train ourselves as long as we are aware enough to recognize them. I like how you talked about the difference between turning down versus turning off our emotions and how important that is. Of course, you talked about how teams are reflections of their leaders, and that's just as true as home as it is at work. I agree with your take. Other people may not. I most certainly do. And I really like how you said we can often trace back culture issues to unaddressed individual issues. That's a great perspective, and the examples that you gave to back it up resonated perfectly. Codey, I really appreciate you being here. Thank you very much for all that you shared. And of course, thank you to all of you for being here for another week. I truly appreciate you coming back week after week to listen to all of our great guests. Thank you. While you're here, please take a quick moment before you go to like the show, subscribe to the show, share it with your network, and please continue to leave us your feedback. We love hearing from you. And while you're online today, please check out our sponsors. Head over to humantel.com, enter the code Inquasive25, and get 25% off the science-backed, best-in-class online training to begin recognizing when people's emotions are changing by identifying shifts in their facial expressions and nonverbal communication. Everything's there for you at humantel.com. Professional interviewers, we say it every week, head over to certifiedinterviewer.com. That's where you can get all your questions answered about both the International Association of Interviewers and the Certified Forensic Interviewer designation. It's all there at certifiedinterviewer.com. And while you're online, please head over to inquasive.com. where you can learn more about the programs our clients ask us to custom facilitate for their senior leaders, sales team, HR team, and more to help them uncover hidden value in all of their high impact conversations. Thank you for being here week after week. We really appreciate it. Stay safe, take care of each other, and we'll see you next time.